So, half of my speech is somehow gone, yeah, thank you, Mr. Hutmacher, thank you, Mr. Zetscher, thank you, Mr. Rocholl, thank you, everybody here. On behalf of the ShareTheMeal team, I would like to express our gratitude for this award and emphasize that we feel very humbled. It feels a bit too big right now, at this moment. When we first heard about this, we were a little bit surprised. We had this letter in our office, and when I opened that letter, it said it's coming from Dieter Zetscher, or Dieter Zetscher was there, and it said European School of Management and Technology, and it also had a signature on there. So it looked very legit. And I thought, I know who they are, but I'm pretty sure that they don't know who we are. But it turns out it's not a joke, and we're very happy to be here. So when I thought what I could talk about, one of the topics obviously was responsible leadership, one was digitalization, one was ShareTheMeal, and then I thought maybe it's nicest if I try to make a case for social innovation. And I would like to try to do that based on the journey that we made on ShareTheMeal. A big portion now is already, we already heard about. But so I could talk a little bit about ShareTheMeal and then 3 observations that we made along this journey. And I hope that it's maybe useful or at least interesting to some of you. And when I thought, how did this actually all start and when did it start? On a personal level, this idea that working on social impact could be interesting was in 2010. And at that time, I was having a very good life in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And on the weekends, I would buy tickets on the Cessnas, and we would fly into the countryside and rent motorbikes there and just go through the countryside. And 2 weekends there are still very vivid in my memory. The one was very positive. I was driving through the countryside for hours, and at some point, in the middle of nowhere, I bumped into a hut. It was really in the middle of nowhere. There was a lady coming out of that hut, and she was my age, she was local, and it turned out that this hut was a health facility. It was, it was a little clinic. And in that clinic, she led me around, and there was one room, and in that room, a woman had just given birth. She wasn't there anymore, but you could still see it. There was another room where they would keep their equipment, or she would keep her equipment, and in the third room, she would have the drugs and the medication. And it was, in comparison to the standards that we have here in Germany and in Western Europe and in the developed world, this was super basic and rudimentary. But what struck with me was the level of commitment that that lady displayed. And I thought, if she wasn't there in this very remote part of that country, a lot of people, I don't know where they would go. And so how this one individual can really make a very tangible effect on quite a lot of people, I thought was really inspiring. The other one was just the weekend, I think, thereafter. I was in Arusha in northern Tanzania, and I bumped into an orphanage, and it was just exactly that experience that you heard before, these stories a couple of decades ago in some parts of Europe and Asia, where everything is missing. And that's the first time that I saw hunger, really, the effects of hunger. The children there were stunted, so they just didn't grow as they would normally do because they didn't have enough nutrients. So they would look very young for the actual age that they have. But even more tragic, actually, is that their brains don't develop. Well, just as tragic, their brains don't develop. And that's an effect that you can't catch up anymore. So when you, as a child, don't get enough to eat, it's a lifelong effect that you see. And that was one of the most demoralizing things that I experienced while being there. So as fate would then have it, I joined the United Nations World Food Programme. It's the largest humanitarian aid organization in the world. They feed 80 million people every year. It's very significant and good scale effects there. Also the appropriate bureaucracy. What I found fascinating was that people there, as you were mentioning, or as I was actually mentioning in that interview, they think that hunger is an entirely solvable thing. And I now belong to these people that think that. And the argument goes that the international community is sufficiently good at food production. There's more than enough food in the world. And we know how to manage a supply chain. And we also, the science on nutrition is reasonably advanced. But what we don't do is that we bring the surplus of food to those that need the food. And we haven't yet succeeded in breaking that vicious cycle of hunger for those people. So they're weak, they are impoverished, they just don't, they don't jump beyond that threshold that they need to meet in order so that they can sustain themselves. And that's when the idea of ShareTheMeal was born. The whole motivation behind, or the idea with the smartphones, and it only costs 50 cents, you heard in the video and Mr. Hudmacher's speech. Out of an entrepreneurship startup perspective, I think interesting is that it really then took quite a long time to turn this into reality. We started with a business plan. My co-founder came on board. We started with a business plan, and the idea was to write that in Microsoft Word. And the belief was the more pages it has, the higher the likelihood that it works. That maybe was one of the reasons why it would take so long. But in 2014, we then we started ShareTheMeal. We built an MVP, a minimum viable product. We succeeded in raising the first funding round, $75,000. And we were admitted, this happened during a sabbatical, we were admitted to the Innovation Accelerator of the United Nations World Food Programme. And then you've heard the status of where we are now. Well, actually, a year ago, we then launched this. And it was this beautiful, fortunate sequence of events that we've seen, to be honest, quite frequently on this project. On the launch day, in the morning, Spiegel did a very favorable article on ShareTheMeal. Super. By lunch, the evening news called, and then in the evening, ShareTheMeal was the second most downloaded app in Germany. Apple saw this, and Google saw it, and then a week thereafter we sat with them, and that then triggered celebrities coming on board, and all these other supporters that we have by now. As of today, we actually stand beyond 500,000. I think we have 530,000 downloads now, 6 million meals shared, and we've also completed the goal to feed those 2,000 pregnant women and their babies in Homs, Syria. And I think we're at 60% of feeding another 1,400 in Lebanon. I think if we look back, none of us would have, we always start dreaming a little bit. Maybe this could end global hunger as a whole. But I think if we want to be reasonable and look back to that, it really worked amazingly well. We have a team of 10 people sitting in Berlin, and I think today is pretty much the culmination of everything to receive such awards that real leaders before have also received. So let me get to the observations. I think the first observation is that we think right now is a really good time to be working on social innovation. And why is that? I think one important reason is that the knowledge on what creates social impact, how to effectively create change, is really quite advanced. One of those tools that I really like is cost-benefit analysis. So it describes the relationship of how much I need to spend to create a certain social return. And it basically is this $1, how much do I get for $1 that I invest? To put an example to that, in the Satari refugee camp, we distributed school meals. And so with school meals, you know that they positively affect the health of the child, but they also increase school enrollment. So more children go to school, they stay longer in school, their ability to follow the lecture is improved. And that ultimately, that all creates an increase in economic productivity. At the same time, they're less sick, so there's less healthcare costs. And all these effects you can start calculating up. It's an economic analysis that you can do. And that you can compare with the money that you need to do these programs. To give you one ratio for food assistance for children, you usually say it's somewhere in the range of 1 to 40. So $1 that you invest has a social economic return of $40. It's pretty nice, I think. There are a couple of institutions that do that. The World Bank does it a lot. The Economist is very interested in the magazine Economist. They do it together with the Copenhagen Consensus, which is this panel of Nobel laureates and distinguished economists. Most ministries of finance and economy also do it to some extent. And what they come up with is a menu, basically. So you have this list of social interventions, and it's climate change, it's education, it's poverty, and so on, and so on, and so on. Hundreds of different social interventions that you can look at, and you can see if I invest $1, if that's the intervention where I think I have the experience and I have the things that I need to do it, if that's what I do, that's the social return on investment that I can expect. So you can start shifting around the money that you have, try to put it into things that create more value, but also you start to understand what the value drivers are. In our case, we could be doing school meals, or we could be doing general food distribution. We could be targeting pregnant women, or we could be doing general food distribution, or we could be targeting children or adults. There's certain things just create more value than others. And I think it's a great way to think about social interventions and can give a lot of guidance. The second one is an unfair advantage of working in social impact, and that is that there's just so much innovation and new technologies in the private sector that haven't been harnessed for the social impact sector yet. And ShareTheMeal is probably the best example for that. When we started working on it, there were 1 billion apps in the App Store, but no one professionally built nonprofit app. And so basically what we had to do, we had these 1 billion apps that we could look at, and these case studies left and right, and we would try to understand what you need to do to create an app. And there were agencies left and right. They all had all this experience. So we would just piggyback on that. But it's not only mobile phones, and it's not only apps. It's also including those that don't have access to financial services. It's providing insurance. Those are the things that I'm interested in. Providing insurance to those that don't have access to it. The whole topic of transfer of money, remittances. We all know what the traditional banking sector charges for that, but now Facebook and PayPal, they also do it at no cost from private to private. There are a lot of things there that already work, but somehow it hasn't really made its way to the social impact sector yet. The last reason why I think it's really good to be a social innovator is that for us, it took a year to get this initial round of funding, the $75,000. And I think we were very lucky. We had a couple of other teams that also wanted money and they never got it. But this is changing. There's the infrastructure for social entrepreneurs and social innovators is getting better. It's 10 times better in North America than it is in Europe, but we're slowly picking up. And one very tangible example is that on the 11th of July, the Innovation Accelerator of the United Nations World Food Programme will be launching in Germany, actually, in Munich. So this combination of really having a manual almost, or a menu of things that you can do, all these things that you can basically learn from the private sector, but then also some support infrastructure, it really, I think it's a good indication that it's great to work in that sector. The second observation is that it really is important who you do your projects with. There is this saying that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I always found it a little bit confusing. It's just like this other saying in the startup world: fail fast, but don't die, or fail fast, but as long as you don't die, you will succeed at some point. That really screws up leadership or responsible leadership. You don't know what to do. But I think, so for ShareTheMeal, I think you have to do both. You have to be fast, but go far. Especially you have to be fast in the beginning, and then you need to build a sustainable model. And there were a lot of people involved in that sustainable model, and this is the time to say thank you for them. So I'm sorry if you don't know them, but just want to briefly say who it was. And that team, I think I've worked with quite a couple of teams. I don't know whether we're the best social innovation team, but I think we try to be the best social innovation team that we can be. And I'm pretty sure I've not worked in a more dedicated team yet. So it's a real pleasure to work with you guys. And some of them are still with us, others are not anymore. But in total, it's Achim, Alex, Anne, Anthony, Barbara, Ben, Brian, Carolyn, Christian, Chris, Konstantin, Cordula, Daniel, Deborah, Donatas, Karen, Katharina, Maria, Max, Matt, Matthias, Nadine, Omar, Paul, Pia, Rainer, Rob, Romain, Sasha, Victoria, Wolfgang, and Yvonne. And I just want to say that obviously this award is a team thing, and I'm very happy to work with you. I also want to say thank you to the World Food Programme. Obviously, without them, this would never work. And I also want to say to a couple of people that also work with the European School of Management and Technology. There, HE Smart is there, and there's other agencies, Icon Mobile and Gabitz and Partner. There are so many people involved. It's always interesting to see it and try to understand who had what role and what led to something else. At the moment, if one of those elements in that chain didn't exist, I'm not sure whether we would be here. So yeah, it's really important to work, to not do it in isolation and work with the right people. The last observation, and that's the end, is that it's already happening. We are, and actually all of us, are already making the world a better place. And that's also what you were referring to. When I read the news, or when I go on social media, it sometimes seems as if everything was going south. But I think it's really worthwhile to look at the data. And you were mentioning a couple of data points. The Millennium Development Goals are a really good reference. If you look at extreme poverty, from 1990 to 2015, we reduced extreme poverty by 2/3. If you look at maternal mortality, we reduced it from 0.4% to 0.2%. We slashed it by 50%. If we look at primary school enrollment in sub-Saharan Africa, it increased from 52% to 80%. So we are making progress. On food security and nutrition, the field that we work on specifically, in 1990, it was 1 out of 5 people, 1 out of 5. Now it's 1 out of 9. Again, almost half. So I think it's a fact that we're making progress. The issue, however, is that if we extrapolate that, it's not 100% certain that we will still live in a world where there's no chronic hunger. It's realistic, but it's not certain. And that's where the social innovation comes in. If we want to live while in a world where there's no zero hunger, then we need to do social innovation. Thank you.